The call came in at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. Multi-vehicle accident on Highway 9. Possible fatalities. All units respond. I grabbed my gear and jumped into the ambulance, having no idea that in 20 minutes I'd be staring into the face of the woman who destroyed my life 5 years ago. The woman who left me standing at the altar without a word of explanation. The woman I was about to save. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let's go back to the moment everything changed. The sirens wailed as we raced through the afternoon traffic, my partner Kyle driving while I checked our equipment for the third time. After 5 years as a paramedic, these calls had become routine. The adrenaline rush, the race against time, the satisfaction of saving lives. It was the career I'd thrown myself into after my world fell apart, and it had given me purpose when I thought I'd lost everything. "Mitchell, take the rollover," Captain Hayes shouted, pointing toward the overturned SUV. "Driver's trapped, unconscious, possible head trauma." I grabbed my medical bag and ran toward the vehicle, my training taking over. The SUV was on its side, the driver's door crushed against the asphalt. I'd have to access the victim through the passenger side, which the fire department was working to cut open. "How long do you need to get me in there?" I called to the firefighter, operating the jaws of life. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Victim's a female, mid-20s, unconscious but breathing. Looks like significant head trauma. I positioned myself as close as I could get, trying to see inside the vehicle. The windows were spider-webbed with cracks, making it difficult to assess the victim's condition. All I could make out was long, dark hair and what appeared to be a serious head wound. "Got it," the firefighter yelled as the passenger door finally gave way. I climbed into the vehicle, immediately checking for a pulse while assessing the victim's injuries. Strong pulse, shallow breathing, definite head trauma with significant bleeding. I needed to stabilize her neck and get her out of here fast. It was when I was placing the cervical collar that I saw her face clearly for the first time. The world stopped. Hannah Westbrook. The woman who was supposed to become Hannah Mitchell 5 years ago. The woman who had vanished from my life without a trace on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. The woman who left me standing at the altar without a word of explanation. The woman I was about to save. My hands froze for a split second, my professional training warring with the emotional tsunami that hit me like a freight train. She looked different, thinner, older, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was unmistakably her. "Mitchell, what's your status?" Kyle's voice snapped me back to reality. "Unconscious female, approximately 27 years old, significant head trauma, possible internal injuries," I called back, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I need a backboard and IV setup, stat."
I pushed every personal feeling down and focused on the job. Hannah was critically injured, and whatever history we had didn't matter right now. She needed a paramedic, not an ex-fiancé with unresolved issues. Working quickly, I stabilized her neck, started an IV, and began assessing her other injuries. Possible broken ribs, definitely a concussion, and she was showing signs of internal bleeding. We needed to get her to the hospital immediately. "Let's move!" I shouted as we carefully extracted her from the vehicle and loaded her onto the stretcher. The ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I worked on Hannah with the same professional competence I brought to every call, monitoring her vitals, adjusting her IV, and radioing ahead to the emergency room. But underneath the clinical exterior, my mind was reeling. What was she doing here? Where had she been for 5 years? Why had she left me standing at the altar in front of 200 guests, including both our families, without so much as a note? "Vitals are stabilizing," I reported to Kyle, who was driving. "But she's still unconscious. Possible grade 3 concussion, definitely needs a CT scan." "You know her?" Kyle asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. He'd been my partner for 2 years and could read me better than most people. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I know her." At the hospital, I helped transfer Hannah to the emergency room team, giving my report to Dr. Sonia Parton, the attending physician. As they wheeled her away for tests, I stood in the hallway feeling like I'd been hit by the same truck that had caused the accident. "James," Dr. Parton approached me a few minutes later. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I said. "How is she?" "Stable for now. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, and some internal bleeding, but nothing we can't handle. She's lucky you got to her when you did. Another hour and—" She didn't finish the sentence. "When will she wake up?" "Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. Head injuries are unpredictable. Are you family?" I almost laughed at the irony. "No. Just the paramedic who brought her in." But I couldn't leave. I told Kyle I'd catch a ride back to the station later and found myself sitting in the waiting room, staring at the floor and trying to process what had just happened. 5 years ago, Hannah Westbrook was the center of my universe. We'd met in college, dated for 3 years, and I'd proposed on the park where we'd had our first date. She'd said yes with tears in her eyes, and we'd spent the next year planning what was supposed to be the perfect wedding. The morning of our wedding, I'd been nervous but excited, standing at the altar in my tuxedo, watching the doors for my bride to appear. The music started, the doors opened, and her bridesmaids walked down the aisle. But Hannah never came. Her maid of honor, Jessica, had whispered something to the minister, who then announced that there would be a brief delay. 20 minutes later, Jessica returned with the news that would shatter my world. Hannah was gone. Her wedding dress was hanging in the bridal suite, but she had vanished without a trace. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. Just an empty room and 200 confused wedding guests. I'd tried everything to find her, called her friends, her family, but Hannah had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed. Her parents claimed they didn't know where she was. They only decided to tell the truth when I said we needed to call the police, report her missing. Hannah didn't want to see me. Simply, she didn't want anything to do with me anymore. They told me to move on. Mrs. Westbrook gave me a sad look and a strong hug. Nothing made sense. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I'd quit my job in marketing, sold our house, and eventually found my way into emergency medical services. Saving other people's lives had given me a sense of purpose when my own life felt meaningless. And now, 5 years later, she was lying unconscious in a hospital bed 20 feet away from where I sat. "James Mitchell?" I looked up to see a nurse standing in front of me. "Yes?" "The patient you brought in is awake. She's asking for you." My heart pounded as I followed the nurse down the hallway. Hannah was in a private room, propped up in bed with bandages around her head and various monitors beeping softly. When she saw me, her eyes widened with shock and something that looked like fear. "James," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Oh God, James, I'm so sorry." I stood in the doorway, not trusting myself to speak. She looked so fragile, so different from the confident, radiant woman I'd fallen in love with. But her eyes were the same, those deep brown eyes that had once looked at me with such love and now held nothing but pain and regret. "How are you feeling?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "Like I got hit by a truck," which I guess I did. "You're lucky to be alive. Another few minutes and—" I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "Of all the paramedics in the city, it had to be you." "Hannah, I need to know why you left," she finished. "I know. You deserve an explanation. You deserved one 5 years ago." I pulled a chair up to her bedside, my hand shaking slightly. "I've been waiting 5 years for this conversation." Hannah closed her eyes, and I could see her gathering strength for what she was about to say. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. The morning of our wedding, I got a phone call from Dr. Morrison. Do you remember him, my neurologist? I frowned. You were seeing a neurologist? You never told me that. I'd been having symptoms for months. Tremors in my hands, difficulty with coordination, mood swings. I thought it was just stress from wedding planning, but my mother insisted I see a doctor. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach. What kind of symptoms? The kind that run in my family. My grandmother died of Huntington's disease when I was 12. My mother has been showing symptoms for the past few years, though she's been hiding it well. Huntington's disease. I knew enough to understand the implications. A genetic, degenerative neurological disorder with no cure, progressive loss of movement, cognitive ability, and emotional control, leading to death within 10 to 20 years of onset. The test results came back that morning. Positive. I had the gene. Dr. Morrison said I was already showing early symptoms, and I probably had 10 to 15 years before... She couldn't finish the sentence. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Hannah, why didn't you tell me? We could have faced it together. Could we? She asked, her voice breaking. James, you were 22 years old, about to start your career with your whole life ahead of you. How could I ask you to sign up for watching me slowly deteriorate? How could I condemn you to becoming my caregiver and then my widower before you turned 40? That should have been my choice to make, I said, my own voice thick with emotion.
I know that now, she whispered. But that morning, all I could think about was what I would be taking away from you. Your dreams of children, because I couldn't risk passing this on. Your dreams of growing old together, because I wouldn't make it that far. Your dreams of a normal, happy marriage, because there's nothing normal about watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. I reached out and took her hand, and she didn't pull away. So you just left. I panicked. I was supposed to walk down that aisle and promise you in sickness and in health, knowing that I was bringing nothing but sickness. I couldn't do it. I couldn't trap you in that promise. Where did you go? My aunt in Oregon. I've been living there for the past 5 years, working as a freelance graphic designer, trying to make the most of whatever time I have left. And your symptoms? Hannah held up her left hand, and I could see the slight tremor she was trying to hide. Getting worse. The mood swings are harder to control, and I have trouble with fine motor skills sometimes. That's probably what caused the accident. I had a moment of confusion at the intersection. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd just told me. For 5 years, I'd hated her for abandoning me. I'd assumed she'd found someone else or gotten cold feet, or decided I wasn't worth the commitment. I'd never imagined she was trying to protect me from the most devastating news of her life. Hannah, I need you to understand something, I said, leaning forward. What you did, leaving me at the altar, disappearing without explanation, it nearly destroyed me. I spent months thinking I wasn't good enough, that I'd done something wrong, that our entire relationship had been a lie. I know. I'm so sorry. I thought it would be easier for you to hate me than to watch me die. But that wasn't your decision to make, I said firmly. When I proposed to you, when I said I wanted to spend my life with you, I meant all of it. The good times and the bad times, the sickness and the health. You took that choice away from me. I was trying to save you. You were trying to save yourself from having to watch me struggle with your diagnosis, from having to feel guilty about what it would cost me. But Hannah, love isn't about protecting each other from pain. It's about facing the pain together. She was crying harder now, and I could see the weight of 5 years of guilt and regret in her tears. I was so scared, James. I was 22 years old, and I'd just been handed a death sentence. I couldn't think straight. I know. And I understand why you made the choice you did. But it was the wrong choice, Hannah. For both of us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where we'd once planned to build our life together. You've spent 5 years facing this alone, when you could have had someone who loved you by your side. And I've spent 5 years thinking I wasn't worth fighting for, when the truth is, you were fighting for me in the only way you knew how. James, I became a paramedic because of you. After you left, I couldn't stand the thought of sitting in an office, pushing papers, pretending that life was normal. I needed to do something that mattered, something that helped people. In a way, your leaving led me to the career that brought me to you today. You saved my life, she said quietly. And I saved yours 5 years ago, even though I didn't understand it at the time. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had been revealed. Finally, Hannah spoke. What happens now? She asked.
I don't know, I said honestly. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. I'm not the naive 22-year-old who thought love could conquer anything, and you're not the scared 22-year-old who thought running away was the answer. No, we're not. But I still love you, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I've tried to move on, tried to date other people, but no one ever measured up to what we had. And now that I know the truth, I understand why. Hannah's eyes filled with fresh tears. James, you can't. You can't love me knowing what's coming. I'm not the same person you fell in love with. The disease is already changing me, and it's only going to get worse. You're right, I said, sitting back down beside her bed. You're not the same person. You're stronger than the woman I knew 5 years ago. You've been living with this diagnosis, facing it head on, building a life for yourself despite everything. That takes incredible courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. I reached for her hand again. Hannah, I'm not saying we can just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. Too much has changed. But I'm also not walking away again. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we can start over, not as the people we were, but as the people we are now. I'm saying that I'd rather have whatever time we have together than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Hannah shook her head. You don't understand what you're signing up for. The progression of this disease, it's not pretty, James. I'll lose my ability to walk, to speak clearly, to control my emotions. Eventually, I won't even recognize you. And you don't understand what you're asking me to do. You're asking me to walk away from the only woman I've ever truly loved because loving her might be difficult. You're asking me to choose the easy path over the right path. It's not about easy or difficult, it's about practical. You could have a normal life with someone else. I don't want a normal life with someone else, I said firmly. I want whatever life I can have with you, even if it's complicated, even if it's heartbreaking, even if it's shorter than we'd hoped. Hannah was quiet for a long time, studying my face as if trying to read my thoughts. You really mean that? I really mean that. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time since I'd found her in that wreckage, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I'm scared, James. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. Over the next few days, as Hannah recovered from her injuries, we talked more than we had in the entire last year of our previous relationship. We talked about the 5 years we'd spent apart, the people we'd become, the dreams we'd had to adjust. Hannah told me about her life in Oregon, about the small apartment she'd rented near the coast, and the freelance design work that kept her busy, and the volunteer work she'd started doing at an animal shelter. She'd built a quiet but meaningful life for herself, one focused on making the most of each day, rather than planning for a future she wasn't sure she'd see. I told her about my journey to becoming a paramedic, about the satisfaction I found in helping people during their worst moments, and about the way the job had taught me that life was precious and unpredictable, and not to be wasted on regrets.
You know what's funny? Hannah said on her third day in the hospital. I used to think about you all the time, wondering if you'd moved on, if you were happy. I hoped you were, but part of me was selfishly glad when I never heard about you getting married. I came close once, I admitted, about 2 years ago. Her name was Jade, and she was perfect on paper. Kind, smart, beautiful, wanted the same things I wanted. What happened? I realized I was trying to recreate what we had instead of building something new. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me. I broke it off before it got too serious. Do you regret that? No, because if I'd married Jade, I wouldn't have been available when you needed me most. Maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. Hannah smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since the accident. You always were a romantic. And I always were a pragmatist. Maybe that's why we worked so well together. Worked. Past tense. Work. Present tense. If you'll let me. On the day Hannah was discharged from the hospital, I drove her to her parents' house. She was moving slowly, still recovering from her injuries, and I could see the subtle signs of her condition that I'd missed before. The slight hesitation in her movements, the way she had to concentrate on tasks that used to be automatic. They don't know you're here? I asked as I parked in front of the familiar house I knew so well. No, Hannah said nervously. I haven't spoken to them since the accident. I didn't want to worry them. They don't even know I'm in town. We walked to the front door, and I could feel Hannah's tension increasing with each step. She rang the doorbell with trembling hands. The door opened to reveal Margot Westbrook, Hannah's mother. For a moment, she just stared at us in complete shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Hannah? She finally whispered. Oh my God, Hannah! Hi, Mom, Hannah said in a small voice. Robbie! Margot called into the house. Robbie, come here, now! Hannah's father appeared behind her, and his reaction was equally dramatic. When he saw Hannah, and then saw me standing beside her, his legs seemed to give out. Hannah, my daughter, he said, his voice breaking. You're home. Margot pulled Hannah into a desperate hug, tears streaming down her face. We were so worried. Your aunt said you were traveling and couldn't reach you. And James, Robert said, extending his hand to me with watery eyes. James, my boy. The word boy hit me like a punch to the stomach. Even after everything that had happened, they still saw me as family. Mr. and Mrs. Westbrook, I said, shaking Robert's hand. Come in, both of you, Margot said, pulling us inside. I'll make coffee. You two have so much to tell us. We spent the next few hours in the familiar living room, Hannah telling her parents about the accident, about how I had been the paramedic who saved her, about the conversations we'd had at the hospital. So you two are... Hannah asked hesitantly. We're figuring it out, Hannah said, looking at me. We're different people now. But you still love each other, Robert observed. It wasn't a question. Hannah and I looked at each other, and I saw the answer in her eyes before she spoke. Yes, she said simply. We still love each other. After Hannah went to her old room to rest, Margot and Robert asked me to stay and talk. James, Margot began, her hands nervously smoothing her skirt, we need to tell you something. Something we should have said 5 years ago. What is it?
Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped together. When Hannah disappeared on your wedding day, she made us promise that we wouldn't try to find her or contact her. She said she needed time and space to figure some things out about herself. We didn't know what to do, Margot added. Our daughter was clearly in crisis, but she begged us to respect her wishes. So we did, even though it broke our hearts. But James, Robert continued, you need to know that we never stopped rooting for you two. We never stopped hoping that someday you'd find your way back to each other. You were perfect together, Margot said, tears in her eyes. The way you looked at each other, the way you took care of each other, we knew it was true love. When Hannah would call us from Oregon, she never mentioned you directly, Robert said, but we could hear in her voice that she still loved you. And when we'd ask about you, she'd always change the subject very quickly. We always hoped you'd find each other again, Margot added. Maybe not the way it happened, but sometimes fate works in mysterious ways. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I thought you blamed me. I thought maybe I'd done something to drive her away. Never, Robert said firmly. You were the best boyfriend our daughter ever had. You treated her like a princess, but you also challenged her to be the best version of herself. We couldn't have asked for a better son-in-law. And now, Margot said, smiling through her tears, maybe we can still have that son-in-law. We don't know what the future holds, I said honestly. We're taking things slow, one day at a time. That's the only way to do it, Robert agreed. But James, I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in this house. You'll always be family to us, no matter what happens. That night, as Hannah slept in her childhood room and I drove home, I thought about the conversation with her parents. For 5 years, I'd carried guilt and confusion about why Hannah had run. Now I knew the truth, and I also knew that the people who loved her most had been rooting for us all along. It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place, another sign that maybe, just maybe, we were meant to find our way back to each other. The next day, I headed to Hannah's parents' house right after my shift. She should probably head back to Oregon, she said as we stood in the living room. My life is there now. Is it? I asked. Or is it just where you've been hiding? She looked at me with surprise. That's not fair. Isn't it? You built a life in Oregon because it was far away from everything that reminded you of what you'd lost. But Hannah, what if instead of running from your past, you could build a future? What kind of future? James, be realistic. I have maybe 10 good years left, and that's if I'm lucky. Then let's make them the best 10 years possible. Here, in the city where everyone knows what happened at our wedding? Here where you have people who love you, where you have me if you want me, where you have the best medical care available for your condition. Hannah sat down heavily in the couch. I don't know if I can do this, James. Starting over, letting people back into my life, knowing that they'll have to watch me deteriorate. You don't have to decide everything today, I said, sitting beside her. But you don't have to decide alone either. Stay for a week. Let me show you what your life could look like here. If you still want to go back to Oregon after that, I'll drive you to the airport myself. And if I stay, then we figure it out together, day by day, step by step. Hannah was quiet for a long time, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, she looked at me with those brown eyes that had haunted my dreams for 5 years. 1 week, she said. That week turned into a month, and that month turned into 3 months. Hannah found a small apartment across town and started taking freelance design work from local businesses. I helped her find a neurologist who specialized in Huntington's disease, and she started a treatment regimen that slowed the progression of her symptoms. We took things slowly, dating like teenagers despite our shared history. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, took long walks in the park where I'd proposed to her years earlier. We were learning each other all over again, not as the young, naive couple we'd been, but as the adults we'd become. You know what's strange? Hannah said one evening as we sat on my couch watching a movie. I feel more like myself with you than I have in 5 years. What do you mean? In Oregon, I was always Hannah with Huntington's. Everything I did was filtered through the lens of my diagnosis. But with you, I'm just Hannah. You see me, not my disease. That's because you're not your disease, I said. You're a woman who happens to have a medical condition. There's a difference. Is there? Because some days it doesn't feel that way. There is. And on the days when you can't see the difference, I'll remind you. 6 months after the accident, Hannah had what her doctor called a bad day, a sudden worsening of her symptoms that left her confused, agitated, and unable to control her emotions. I found her in her apartment, crying and throwing things, convinced that everyone was plotting against her. "You need to leave," she said when she saw me. "I'm dangerous. I'm crazy. This is what I was trying to protect you from." Instead of leaving, I sat down on her floor and waited. I didn't try to reason with her or calm her down. I just stayed, letting her know that I wasn't going anywhere. When the episode passed an hour later, Hannah collapsed in exhaustion and shame. "Now do you see? This is my future. This is what you're signing up for." "I see a woman having a bad day," I said, helping her to the couch. "I see someone I love struggling with something incredibly difficult. I don't see crazy, and I don't see dangerous." "But how can you say that? I threw a lamp at the wall." "And I've seen people throw much worse things for much less important reasons. Hannah, you're dealing with a neurological condition that affects your brain chemistry. Having bad days doesn't make you a bad person." "But it's going to get worse." "Maybe. But it's also going to have good days mixed in. And I plan to be here for all of them." That night, as Hannah slept fitfully beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. Life was too short and too unpredictable for that. The next morning, I made breakfast and sat down across from Hannah at her small kitchen table. "I have something to ask you." "James, if this is about yesterday." "It's not about yesterday. It's about today and tomorrow and all the days after that." I reached across the table and took her hands. "Hannah, I know we said we were taking things slow, getting to know each other again, but I've realized something." "What?" "I don't need more time to know that I want to spend whatever time we have together. I don't need more proof that you're worth fighting for. I already know." Hannah's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you. Not the memory of who you used to be, but who you are right now. I love your strength, your courage, your determination to make the most of every day. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, and the way you cry during commercials. I love that you volunteer at the animal shelter even though it exhausts you. And I love that you still leave me little notes in my lunch like you did when we were 22. "James."
"I'm not asking you to marry me," I said quickly. "I know we're not ready for that yet. But I'm asking you to move in with me. I'm asking you to let me be your partner in this, officially. I'm asking you to stop protecting me from your disease and start letting me help you fight it." Hannah was crying now, but they were different tears than I'd seen from her before. These weren't tears of fear or regret. They were tears of hope. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because once we do this, once we really commit to facing this together, there's no going back. It's only going to get harder from here." "I'm sure," I said. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Even knowing that I might not be able to take care of myself in a few years, even knowing that you might have to feed me, dress me, remind me who you are, even knowing all of that. Hannah, 5 years ago, I stood at an altar ready to promise to love you in sickness and in health. I meant those words then, and I mean them now. But we're different people now. We are. We're stronger, wiser, more realistic about what love actually means. We know that it's not just about the good times. It's about choosing each other even when things get difficult." Hannah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where we'd both grown up, where we'd fallen in love, where we'd lost each other and found each other again. Promise me that if it gets to be too much, if taking care of me starts to destroy your life, you'll tell me. Promise me that you won't sacrifice everything for me out of guilt or obligation. I promise to tell you if I'm struggling. But, Hannah, I won't promise to leave you, because I won't. What I will promise is that we'll figure out how to make it work, together. She turned back to me, and I could see the decision forming in her eyes. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, let's do this. Let's build a life together, whatever that looks like. I stood up and crossed the room to her, taking her in my arms for the first time since the day she'd left me at the altar. She felt different, thinner, more fragile. But she was still Hannah. She was still the woman I'd fallen in love with, just with a few more battle scars. I love you, I whispered into her hair. I love you too, she whispered back. I never stopped. A year later, we were living in a house we'd bought together, a small, single-story place with wide doorways and grab bars in the bathroom designed with Hannah's future needs in mind. She was still working, still volunteering, still living her life to the fullest despite the gradual progression of her symptoms. We joined a support group for Huntington's families, and Hannah had become something of a mentor to newly diagnosed patients. She helped them understand that a diagnosis wasn't a death sentence. It was a call to live more intentionally, more purposefully, more lovingly. You know what I realized? She said one evening as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset. I spent 5 years thinking that leaving you was the most loving thing I could do, but I was wrong. What's the most loving thing? I asked. Staying, fighting, letting you choose to love me even when it's hard, trusting that you're strong enough to handle whatever comes. And what's the most loving thing I can do? She said simply. Keep choosing me, every day, even when I'm not easy to love, especially when I'm not easy to love. That's the easiest promise I've ever made, I said, taking her hand and feeling the slight tremor that was now a constant presence. Even when I can't remember your name, especially then, because I'll remember for both of us. Hannah smiled and leaned against my shoulder. I used to think that love was about protecting each other from pain, but I think I understand now. Love is about facing the pain together and finding joy despite it. Or maybe because of it, I said. Maybe the joy is sweeter because we know how precious it is. As the sun set over our small backyard, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 years ago, I'd thought my life was over when Hannah left me at the altar. I'd thought that love had failed me, that I wasn't worth fighting for. But I'd been wrong about everything. Hannah hadn't left because she didn't love me. She'd left because she loved me too much to burden me with her diagnosis. And I hadn't been abandoned. I'd been set free to become the man who could handle whatever life threw at us. The accidents that had brought us back together hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a second chance. A chance to love each other not as the naive young people we'd been, but as the seasoned adults we'd become. A chance to build something real and lasting, even if it wouldn't last as long as we had originally hoped. James? Hannah said softly. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For saving my life. Not just in the ambulance, but every day since. For showing me that love isn't about the time you have, it's about what you do with the time you're given. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Thank you for coming back to me, for letting me love you the way you deserve to be loved. As we sat there in the gathering darkness, I knew that our future would be different from what we had originally planned. There would be challenges ahead that would test us in ways we couldn't imagine. But we would face them together, and that made all the difference. The runaway bride had finally come home, and this time she was staying. An absolutely powerful story about second chances, the true meaning of love, and how sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest courage. Have you ever made a sacrifice for someone you loved? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story of James and Hannah touched your heart and reminded you that true love never gives up, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.